shortly as they come on. So firstly, let me start by introducing myself and welcoming you to this evening's Cork Social Democrats virtual event looking at the business community and particularly focusing on resilience, recovery and renewal, and what we can do to support our small, medium and even large businesses as we come through and out of COVID through the rest of 2021. So just some housekeeping here. Scott, I'm not Scott, but he's here with me. I'm Kojo Salome. I'm the treasurer of the Cork North Central Social Democrats, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here this evening to this session. If you are online and wish to tweet about this, please do so. Please tag in the Cork SocDems at Cork SocDems, or use the hashtag Cork Business Renewal. As we are in a webinar session this evening, we will allow some time at the end to take questions from the audience. So please pop those questions into the chat, and we'll endeavour to answer them. How the session is going to work this evening is I'm just going to run through and give a very brief introduction to our panel. Once that's done, we're going to sort of run this as a question and answer session. We've given some thoughts and some areas to each of the panel to hopefully focus on their area of expertise, and I'll try and work through each of them as we go through. But obviously, to the panel, you're very free to jump in on other people's questions. And at the end, towards the end of the session, I'll try and bring in questions from the audience attending online. So, in no particular order, it's my great pleasure this evening to welcome our very distinguished panelists. So I'll start firstly with Richard Jacob, who I guess who's the proprietor of the Idaho Café in Cork City Centre, right behind Brown Thomas. I'm sure all of you are already following Richard on Twitter and on his post site at idahocafe.tumblr.com, and I'm sure I'm very interested to hear about some of Richard's feedback, as he's been very vocal, writing a number of open letters and commenting on the situation for businesses, and particularly for businesses in the hospitality sector. We wanted this evening to broaden this out, so we've asked Fiona Dunne, who's the national coordinator for the ICTU and the One Movement, and has a very long background in the trade union movement, to come and talk to us, and hopefully she'll be able to throw a little bit of light on the situation, on how it looks from the perspective of the employees and some of the challenges people and employees will have as we go through and start coming out of COVID. We're very, very welcome to have Councillor Lorna Bogue with us, who obviously sits on Cork City Council, and particularly relevant here, sits on the Enterprise Committee, and I'm sure Laura will hopefully be able to fill us in on a lot of the things that she as an elected representative and the council can do to support businesses, which again brings us neatly to Paul McGuirk, who's working as the head of enterprise within the local enterprise office, and I guess people like Paul in the work that he does are really key right now to supporting innovation and enterprise in Cork City. You might think in times like this that nobody's starting up new businesses, nobody's really trying to grow their businesses, but sometimes through adversity can come opportunity. So hopefully we'll hear from Paul around what he does, and then finally Donal Calahane, who many would know from his previous role as the founder of Republic of Work. The problem with our friend Mr. Calahane is that when you look at his CV and what he's done, you don't know where to start. It's so extensive, with a wide range of experiences in the across different parts of the business sector, and specifically for this evening, he's obviously a member of the Cork Chamber of Commerce, and now is actually maybe I should describe formally of this parish. He's moved out of Cork and out of the Republic of Work until a new position in London, which will obviously give him some unique perspectives on how things are done, not just in Ireland but elsewhere. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panel for coming this evening and for giving their time, and hopefully it will be a very interesting session. So I'll go ahead and maybe Richard, I can start with you now, and maybe you can just give us some thoughts, from your perspective as a business owner in the hospitality sector. What are the real key challenges and problems you're facing today?
I think the largest problem, apart from not having my video working, which is a bonus for a lot of people, the largest problem we have at the moment is complete uncertainty. We have no idea when we're reopening, what we're reopening as, how long we're going to be open for, when we reopen. And just this whole question of what happens next. We're trying to keep ourselves motivated. We're trying to keep our team motivated and incentivized and wanting to come back to work without being able to tell them, you're starting back on the 1st of June and here's what we're going to be doing. We're meeting up social on web chats and chatting and saying what we're going to be doing, but we don't know when we're going to be doing it. Apart from that, it's just a question of trying to stop costs hemorrhaging. We're still paying rates. We're still paying, well, we had our rates deferred last year. We're still paying our rent every day. I got our rent rates bill this week. We're still paying all of our fixed costs. So you're seeing that going out every day, but you don't know when you're going to be able to start coming back. And that's kind of the main problem for us.
That's brilliant. If by magic we can now see you.
And there we are.
So, I think that's very helpful. So you obviously mentioned their uncertainty there. We've obviously seen this evening's news that we may know something more next week. Would you really then be looking for from the central government, a sort of firm dates, or what would your ideal outcome be in terms of getting more certainty?
Not dates. I don't think we can look for dates, but if it was linked to some kind of data, so we could all sit and say, okay, when it gets down to 200 new cases and a positivity rate of 2.8, it's all systems go. Then everyone in the country could be looking at that number, looking at it, bringing it down, saying, yep, we're nearly there, we're nearly there. But instead we have this kind of just, well, it's going to happen, but we can't tell you when it's going to happen. And for us then as well, it's this whole kind of just vagueness of what you're going to be allowed to do when you reopen. And there's this kind of lovely loose talk of an outdoor summer. And it sounds lovely, it's a lovely catchphrase. And for us, we're very lucky because we do have a large outside terrace, and we worked very closely with Cork City Council, and Caroline Street has always been pedestrianised, but we now have much more access during a limited time, only from 11 to 5 every day. But we can have an outside tables. But for 80% of businesses, hospitality businesses, an outdoor summer is meaningless. It's just sort of a little bit of a cop-out of saying, it's all going to be fine. We're going to be sitting outside in the scorching hot sun, meeting up with our friends and having a pint in a beer garden. And it doesn't work like that. I think we need to be looking and talking about ventilation. There's just no mention at all of the impact of ventilation and the fact that every business now, right now, today, every shop should have their windows open. They should have their doors open. They should have their air conditioning turned off and onto full extract. And there's no talk about this. The virus is spread like invisible cigarette smoke. At the moment, you can go into a cafe to get takeout coffee. The windows and doors are all shut and you're standing in a fog. And we need to just move on and say, okay, here's how we're going to do it. And just tell people a little bit what to do.
No, I think that's fascinating then. So, if you were Taoiseach for the day, say next Tuesday, you'd really then be looking to set out that firm that firm roadmap. So from the perspective where you are now with your business, what are you trying to do in terms of planning that reopening? Is it just sort of treading water while you wait, or do you have any firm plans that when you get the nod about what you're going to do next?
We've kind of gone through so many firm plans. We had a lovely Valentine's Day reopening menu. Then we had a St. Patrick's Day theme. Then we're kind of thinking spring into Idaho, everything spring flowers. We grew tons of daffodils ready for March reopening. So we're sitting out here surrounded by lovely daffodils. Now looking at putting aside our Easter menu, that's gone. So we're now looking at sort of a summer menu. So we are planting everything we can so that we have lots of our own produce. But again, there's just a huge degree of treading water because you don't know when. All we can do is have all the outside furniture that we can ready, have a lovely menu ready, as much of our suppliers lined up. And again, it's this awkwardness of bringing a supplier and saying, hi, how are you? I know we haven't been ordered anything since the 22nd of December. Now we need a ton. Can you do that? And it doesn't work like that with artisan food producers. You can't just throw it at them and hope it's okay. But look, we're all in uncertainty. We just have to make the best of it.
Well, I think that's a really good point you make. Because it's not just you at the front end; it's on the knock-on of everybody else that's in your supply chain as well as your employees. They're all going to be stuck, and obviously, any business that's sitting there now, particularly, isn't going to be sitting there with a ton of stock just waiting, because they don't want it to become obsolete, because you don't know. Even more so, in hospitality and food and drink, because if it's perishable, you've got no idea how much you should be ordering right now, because whether things going to come back. So on the back of that, then, do you think that there's more that the government can be doing to support your sector over and above the sort of general supports they put in today?
I'm not just saying this because the lovely lineup of people who are coming straight after me, but we actually have had very good support from Cork City Council, who helped us make Caroline Street much more people-friendly. They also provided winterproofing grants at Christmas, so we could put up winterproofing and weatherproofing outside, and they waived rates when we couldn't afford to pay them. And the government is giving us the CRSS payments, which is covering not all of our fixed costs, but a lot of our fixed costs. Otherwise, we would be gone by now. We would have closed down if it wasn't for those supports. And the VAT rate has been reduced to 9%, which is no good to us at the moment because we're closed. But I think we need to kind of look at it in a slightly longer way now. I'm optimistic enough to say, I think we're going to have a busy summer. I think Ireland is going to be busy when we're allowed to go out and join the Taoiseach for a pint in a beer garden. I think everyone's going to be dying to get out, and they're going to be dying to see their friends. And a lot of people have been earning the same salary. We're not. We've all been unemployed since Christmas. Unfortunately, our team are as well. We used the wage subsidy the last time, and we wouldn't have a business to reopen if we did it this time. We wouldn't have funds to reopen. I think we need to look beyond COVID, and I think we need to look and say, what happens in September, October, November? What happens in 2022? And let's look and say, it's time to look and say that small and medium enterprises are not a cash cow anymore. Governments can't just keep on hitting and saying, we need to more cash, increase employers' PRSI. You need something else, increase rates, increase, get a different water charge in. We need to start looking and say the SMEs employ the bulk of people in this country. We need to look and say, how can we help you? Like as an SME, I'm not looking for a handout, but I am looking for a hand. And I think this is the thing. I think we need to work much more closely with government. I think the government needs to come to us and say, how can we help you? For example, like if you look at Patrick Street at the moment, when the wheels came off this wagon with COVID, it wasn't the local businesses who folded. They're still there. We're looking to reopen. Debenhams have gone. All the major UK, and now that wasn't COVID, that was another thing. But all the major high street chains have gone at the first hint of trouble. And this is another hint of trouble. And I'm not libeling them, but the Costas and the Wetherspoons, they just put a line through and say, we don't need Cork anymore, it's not profitable. But the people who own a local business can't do that. They've got invested, they're invested in society. They can't just move their kids to a different school, can't move out of it. And I think we need to look and respect and say, let's embrace SMEs and not just use them as a cash cow.
Well, thank you very much. Again, that's interesting. So if folks have questions for Richard, do pop them in the chat and we'll try and come back to them at the end. So thank you for that, and we'll come back to you later on. Maybe I'll turn next to DC, which I believe, are you in London or are you back in the promised land that is Cork?
I'm back in the promised land, but this weekend I'm back in London again. So yeah, I guess it's I'm in a strange perspective. Can I just start by saying, if we ever convinced Richard Jacob to be Taoiseach for a day, the trick would be to make him not get out of that role that day. But yeah, so I mean, look, just to be clear to everyone, so I have a very strange day job at the moment. I'm running the largest COVID-19 testing company in the United Kingdom. So we're currently carrying out about 50,000 COVID tests a day, which is about 5 times what the Irish government do. So that's the reason why I suppose I am in a lucky perspective where, you know, I have to be tested every 2 days for COVID-19. I've had COVID-19 and I've been vaccinated, but it does give me the freedom where I am allowed travel kind of 3 weeks in Ireland, 3 weeks in London. So it's put me in a kind of a very unusual perspective where I'm very much kind of one half of the month I'm switched on to the Irish media, the Irish response, how Irish businesses are being affected by COVID. And then for the rest of the month, I'm kind of seeing the UK perspective on everything, you know? So it's kind of very interesting to be able to compare and contrast the two.
Well, in that case, then maybe you're the best person to ask. You know, with the exception of getting vaccines into people's arms, what are the UK government doing right that the Irish government should be picking up on, and vice versa?
So it's an interesting one. I mean, basically, it's a very, very simple thing. The So first of all, to make things clear, vaccination is not the solution here. I mean, like when everybody in the country is vaccinated, they still won't be allowed on airplanes. So I mean, unfortunately, being vaccinated doesn't mean that you're not a carrier of the disease. So I mean, I think there's too much emphasis on. I think the Irish government in particular have too much of an emphasis on, you know, let's kind of push off decision making on stuff because at some point everybody will be vaccinated and then the world will be wonderful. I think the UK government have very much in the last month or so realized that actually that's not like the path to reopening is vaccinate those in danger, vaccinate the people who can be very badly affected by this, but at the same time, you're never going to get to 100% vaccination. So therefore, you have to make a plan to kind of in some way try to restore some element of normality. So, I mean, obviously, they have set a very, very specific timeline to reopening that if they stuck to it means, I think, on the 21st of June, you know, every restriction is gone. They have put those all to KPIs and metrics. And I guess while they haven't publicly put those metrics out there, they do exist, and we would have frequent calls with Public Health England, which is the British equivalent of the HSE and the NHS and stuff every week, and we would have some visibility into, you know, how close they are or aren't to those metrics. I think the biggest thing that the British government got right was treating part of it like a health problem, and then treating the rest of it like a logistics problem. So what the British government did very early on is they did a very simple thing. You know, they have one of the most advanced event industries in the world. They put on, you know, some of the best concerts in the world, like Glastonbury and the O2 Arena and the London Olympics and all this stuff. And they tapped into that expertise of logistics and brought, you know, those people who were all out of work and unemployed because of the concert and music industry being dead. And they brought them into play on the logistics side of the vaccines delivery and of the testing delivery. So you actually had, you know, you had doctors focused on keeping the vaccines and stuff going, but then you had logistics experts deciding on that. I think in Ireland, we kind of, somehow we fell back and we kind of went, look, I mean, this is a challenge that no organization could be ready for, but somehow we thought that the organization that we've been giving out to about hospital crises and trolley problems for years, somehow we thought that, you know, we could throw 50x the workload on top of that organization and expect a different outcome. And I mean, I know a lot of people working in that space, and they are working past the point of all sanity. But I think they, you know, it's not just a question of throwing resources at something. You have to throw expertise into the mix thing.
So it's interesting that you obviously talked about logistics. I'd be curious, you know, particularly in the light of what Richard was saying, that the UK government had their Eat Out to Help Out scheme over the summer, where the government gave you money to go and have dinner midweek in a restaurant. You think that would be a good idea to bring to Ireland? I
do, and I read something today about I just in some newspaper or something today about a suggestion, you know, because I mean, obviously they tried last year to do the scheme, you know, where they gave you the tax rebate for staying in hotels and stuff like that, which apparently the pickup wasn't great on. So there was a suggestion of a better scheme basically to replace that. I mean, the reality is that when all this is done and dusted, you have like you know, the economy isn't going to kickstart itself. I mean, for all the mocking and all that, I mean, you know, you see it like the issue in America, you know, where they're just handing out stimulus checks. I mean, is that the solution? I don't know. But the one thing is that, you know, businesses are not going to have, like, you know, the day they reopen, they're not going to have the money for marketing. They're not going to have the money for promotion. They're going to need help to drive businesses. And I honestly think in Cork, I think we're very, very lucky because I think we have an incredibly connected business community. And whereas I think in other parts of the country, things might, you know, the business community might be a little bit more selfish about things. We're very lucky in Cork that we've always had, you know, the connections between City Hall and people like Cork Business Association, Cork Chamber, you know, the Hotels Federation, the Restaurant Association. And I suspect that, you know, when we know things are going to come back, you'll see a lot more cooperation between the business community to try and, you know, whether it's, you know, launching particular initiatives over weekends or, you know, what you're talking about, like we'll come together and we'll definitely put a bit of effort into it, I think.
Yeah. It's curious. It's interesting that you mentioned the business community. And obviously, you sat on the board of Cork Chamber. Yeah. What do you think? What are you hearing through the chamber in terms of what organisations need next to sort of come out as we come out of the pandemic?
Yeah, there's a lot. You know what? The reality is, like everything, there's an awful lot going on behind the scenes. like earlier this year, I was involved in a government task force with the Department of Enterprise on, I guess we were putting together a national SME and entrepreneurship growth plan. And I mean, it's kind of an ambitious document, you know, outlining kind of, you know, government strategy for the next 5 years around entrepreneurship. Some of it now had to be very much changed to accommodate COVID and stuff. But I think, you know what, I mean, even if you look at last week, the announcements, you know, I mean, we've been listening a long time to the fact that in Ireland 2040, the government's long-term strategy for the country, you know, Cork is going to be the fastest growing region in Ireland over the next 20 years. We were all kind of, to a certain degree, waiting to see, you know, how that commitment would be dealt with practically. And I think, you know, announcements like the Docklands funding announcement last week, the announcement today that once again Cork is going to have Ireland's tallest building. Like, I think to a certain degree, what's happening behind the scenes is, you know, all the kind of the gears and the cogs are trying to be put together to make sure that, you know, Cork, when stuff comes back, Cork is at the forefront of things. And I genuinely am, like, I mean, I've seen so much work behind the scenes over the last even 12 months. You know, I mean, we've a very dedicated team in Cork Chamber that, you know, on a daily basis are talking to every department, talking to City Hall, making sure that businesses' voice is out there. But, you know, the fact is, whereas, you know, normally you're lobbying for particular things or lobbying against particular things, the problem at the moment is, you know, we just need the ideas. Like, we just need the government doesn't know what they're going to do, so it's hard to lobby for or against, if you know what I mean.
And maybe just one final question before we wrap up with you, DC. In terms then of, you obviously were instrumental in getting the Republic of Work set up, and obviously that's a great space for new startups and small businesses to use in terms of office space. But obviously, given the pandemic, where do you see the future of office space, be it shared, large developments going? Now we're all getting used to working from home.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because obviously, you know, like when COVID came about, we had to pivot an awful lot of what we were doing in Republic of Work. And then suddenly I went from like being responsible for a team of about 8 people to, you know, a team of about 140, which is what we have in City Dock. And what it's taught me very clearly is that, like, we're never going back to the way it was. Like, we're never going back to a scenario where every employee in a company gets up in the morning, goes into a building and works in that building 9 to 5. Because the only reason we were all still doing that was because in a lot of management circles, there was a fear about leaving people work from home. Sure, they'll be working in their pajamas and they'll live that. Like, Paul McGuirk has probably been working in his pajamas for half of last year, and it still hasn't affected the great work that the Enterprise Board has been doing. I think what COVID has done is it's broken down an awful lot of the stereotypes that existed. In the end of the day, you know, you want employees in your business who are motivated, love their jobs, and actually, you know, working from home gives them a better work-life balance. So I think we're going to see a scenario where in almost all businesses, you'll see maybe it's 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, or 3 days and 2 days. But I know that, you know, I wouldn't like to be involved in, you know, I mean, there's going to be a massive surge in things like co-working, because it's just not going to make sense for a lot of big businesses or small businesses to be spending a fortune on real estate and office space anymore. But I'm more optimistic about co-working and more optimistic about flexible workspace and flexible work conditions than I've ever been, you know, and I think that will be the general consensus worldwide now at this stage.
Yeah, and just to come back on that, I do think you're right, because I think, you know, particularly when it comes to flexible arrangements, what this crisis is showing is that flexibility is going to be key, and having spaces that you can use either on a short-term let or, you know, as and when you need it is being really really required by businesses who aren't going to want to lock themselves in, you know, to 2, 3, 5 year 5-year leases. for X amount of space. So, whereas if I was a landlord wanting to rent a building, I might be fairly worried. But
the era of the 20-year lease is completely gone. I mean, even we're seeing it now where, like, in a lot of big businesses, what they're doing is, they're now very much looking at, like, what's the cost per person to put them into an office, and in a lot of cases, something like a co-working space or a flexible workspace or something like that provides a much better option. What you're seeing actually, like, is a lot of big businesses are realizing how much of their cash and capital is tied up in real estate, that frankly now, it's a bit like the whole dilemma around business travel. It's never coming back, because why would you need to go somewhere now when, if you've been doing your meetings for a year on Zoom, why would you need to be traveling for making these sales calls and stuff? You do it as a courtesy as opposed to a business necessity,
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Again, folks, if you have questions for DC, do pop them in the chat. I can see one or two coming through. We'll come back to those at the end. Maybe Fiona, I can turn to you next. So, maybe to take this from a different perspective, and obviously to take it from an employee's perspective. Obviously, from a union background, you're doing very closely working with folks through obviously very, very challenging times and the such like. But as we sort of come out of this, Fiona, what's your thoughts in terms of what organisations should be doing to sort of support their staff as they come back into the workplace, particularly those who may have been furloughed? Oh, I think Fiona, you might be on mute.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kojo, and thanks very much for the invitation to speak to your group tonight and speak on behalf of workers. It's really good to do that, because I think while workers have been integral to what's been going on around COVID, we often forget some of the issues. So, I think just trying to take stock, I suppose, of the pandemic in terms of workers, just to look at it, I think it's thrown a light across a lot of sectors. Everyone has been hit. Everyone has been, really badly hit. But I think it's important to look at, say, workers who are now essential workers that we would have maybe missed in the past. So, supermarket workers, people on the front line who wouldn't normally be on the front line, people who've gone into danger to continue their job, whether they're posties or whether they're collecting the waste and collecting your bins. All of these workers have, they've often been disparagingly called low skill workers, but actually it's mainly linked to the fact that they're low income. But it's essential to society. They're really essential. So I think it's really important to kind of look at the different types of workers, not only just the people who are going to return, but also the people who will, continue to work in these sectors as we reopen. And I think one of the important things I do want to say about reopening is that obviously we are also looking forward to reopening, and we obviously want our members back in the workplace. But we want to make sure a reopening is measured and it's done to the utmost health and safety of workers, because it really is a case of a life and death situation for many. We've seen it in the meat factories, we've seen it healthcare workers, we've seen the huge numbers of people who've been infected with COVID, who've had bringing it home to their families, detrimental impacts on the families because they've continued to work. So it's really important that health and safety is hugely kept to the forefront of any priority, and that if where employers are planning to reopen, or the reopening extends, where people are already in work and, there's things start to reopen in a bigger way, that there's no slippage around health and safety. I think that's really, really important, because it's for obvious reasons, but like we've always in the trade union movement felt that health and safety is a really, really important aspect, and it has quite powerful legislation already. But unfortunately, we've seen in a lot of sectors that the HSA don't have the resources to go and check, the distancing and all of the rest of it. It has led to outbreaks, and it has led to, more outbreaks than we'd like. So, health and safety is probably one of the most paramount things of paramount importance that we'd like to see employers really adhere to. And I'm sure, employers in their planning to reopen, this is something that they will look at. But also I wanted to I suppose also talk about, post-pandemic, I mean, the two sectors that are illustrative rather than exhaustive, I mean, it's impacted everybody. But in terms of, say, retail and hospitality, they have been, you know, really difficult sectors to work in for employees. And we would feel that where you're going back into those sectors and they are reopening, that there has to be a new way of doing work between employers and trade unions and workers. There has to be a way for us to work better. I mean, we've seen internationally research indicating that where you collectively bargain and where you work together more closely, that it has better outcomes. It has better outcomes in terms of employment, has better outcomes in terms of job quality, productivity, and all of the rest of it. So it makes sense that in a post-pandemic situation that we have sectors which are not low-paid sectors, which are not sectors where people are exploited, which are not sectors that people don't particularly want to work in, but they're forced to work in for lots of, you know, economic reasons, that they are going into these sectors as a career choice. So we would like to see in the retail sector currently, for instance, in the big supermarkets and in the, you know, the pennies and the yarns and all the rest, they have put in place some great supports for the workers, and that, you know, they're heavily unionized as well. But it's to make sure that, you know, across retail, that workers are going back into situations where there is support and there is safety, and that there are opportunities to turn that into a career that's a career of choice. So, you know, where they're well paid, there's decent conditions. You know, we talk about flexibility, but there has to be flexibility into the future for employees and not just on one side. In terms of hospitality, you know, there are difficulties. We know at the minute that, you know, a lot of people have been laid off. A lot of higher grades in some hotel chains have been laid off, employees of higher grades. And we would be worried that in a return in the post-pandemic, that there'd be a downward pressure on wages. And that there'd be a push further down. And in a lot of hospitality, wages would have been, you know, quite low pre-pandemic. So what we would look for in, say, hospitality as well, in terms of employers, is to have, you know, to look at the idea of joint labour committees, to look at the idea of working collaboratively together, to set wages, to look at conditions, to, you know, where there's central coordination, I think has better outcomes for a sector, because you're not competing in the domestic sector on wages, you're actually competing on other things. So there's those kind of collaborative actions, I think that would be really useful. In terms of retail as well, there is a national consultative forum to look at a blueprint for the retail sector post-COVID. Well, I think currently, but also obviously post-COVID. It's chaired by the minister, all the stakeholders are there, the unions are there. And I think that's a really good model to ensure that everybody's voice is heard, because I think workers are integral, obviously, to a reopening and a recovery. They're not just producers, they're not just, you know, people on the production line or behind the coffee counter or whatever. They're also consumers. And if we don't pay our workers a correct wage, they're not going to have the money to consume, and they're not going to have the money to consume locally in some of the businesses that you're talking about. I also just wanted to touch a little bit on the remote working issue, because there's been, I suppose, a lot of people, you know, talking about this idea that everyone is going to want to work from home. We found that in a lot of cases, yes, people do, you know, there are a lot of family reasons, commuting reasons for people staying at home, but there also are other issues connected to that, which include health and safety, flexibilities, the ability to disconnect and that sort of thing. So I think we need to look at it a little bit more in a bit more detail. We need to be a bit more measured. There will be lots of people who want to work from home, but I do think there's issues of isolation and dynamics. I mean, there's team dynamics and there's social interaction that is really, really positive for businesses as well. Also, in terms of the topic for tonight, I think if we were to just advocate everyone working from home, I think some local businesses would have a huge difficulty, because the office spaces and the people who generally work in the city, which I'm not sure how many work in all of our cities, but, you know, they are their customers, you know, so there's also going to be a knock-on effect to the local economy if everybody stays at home. I know I've worked from home for the last year. It hasn't been the best year for my job, because we work an awful lot better when we're physically, you know, meeting people. We can do some of it online, and that's proven that in the last year, but there is a difference of, you know, that interaction. And I think some businesses will lose out on that. And obviously, if there's no real kind of traction, or there's no real numbers coming into the city, a lot of small businesses will find it really, really difficult. So that's just some of the key issues that we'd look at. One of the big ones actually, which is coming up in April, is sick leave. And I know this is a difficulty for some of the small employers, the idea that they would pay for sick leave. But I think the mechanisms that we're looking at with government includes a financial mechanism around, the best way to pay. And if it's a bit like national minimum wage, where there's an inability to pay clause, and you can work with government to provide some sort of payment rather than it all coming from the exchequer. So there's a lot of things. Post-COVID, I think we would like to see a lot more collaborations with employers, like to see worker voice much more to the forefront as well, because I think where you are engaging workers in the businesses, particularly where workers are anxious, people are anxious about going back, particularly if they're going to be interacting with the public on a higher basis than they have been. So there is an anxiousness, and we'd be concerned that people are not, forced to go in when they're feeling sick, or, forced to kind of change their contracts, or, have flexibilities on one side and not the other. So there's a whole heap of things, I think, that we're looking at the minute. But I think the important thing is that if we can, where possible, work with employers. I mean, it's in our benefit and the benefit of our members to have viable, dynamic businesses and, a sustainable local economy as well. So yeah, so I mean, if people have any questions, I think that's kind of some of the big things that you asked me, Kojo, to talk about.
Absolutely. Maybe just one final question before we move on to that. Thank you. That was really comprehensive, Fiona. So obviously some businesses aren't going to survive through this, and it's going to then bring a challenge on people who potentially would need to reskill and retrain. What do you think the government should be doing for those folks?
Okay, so it's not, this is not something that's new. I mean, 10, 11 years ago, we had a financial crisis. We had huge amounts of unemployment, and we had particular ways of working, particular ways of addressing that. And I think at the start of the pandemic, one of the, just to go back a little bit, but one of the most important things I think that the government introduced at the behest, has to be said, of proposals from the trade unions, was something that Germany and some European countries had done 10, 11 years ago. It was the wage subsidy, was to keep people employed so that they're linked to the employment, and that there's not a case of you have to restart your business from scratch. So that was a positive to try and keep as many businesses open as possible. But I think when you're looking at the idea of, huge volumes of unemployment when all of the supports start to, move away. And I think in terms of those supports as well, that has to be tapered. It can't be a jump off the cliff kind of thing, at a certain date. I think it has to be tapered, and it has to be done in collaboration with businesses. But where, the retraining kind of element comes in, yes, we would like to see elements of retraining, but I think it has to be really well planned. It's not a case of just offering 50 people in one area a particular course. I mean, I think it has to be tailored. We've seen it before where people go on courses, they're highly skilled in a job that has disappeared, and yet they're being retrained on something that A, they don't want to do, and B, that they have no interest in going into. So we have to do it in terms of the individual. It's there's a heavy resource attached to that, but I think what's important is the outcome will be more beneficial. So people will be able to kind of go into something that will suit them. We also need to look at the whole idea of the green economy and the idea of a just transition. So there will be new sectors established. There will be people who will have to move from one sector to another. So I think it's important to look at those sectors and see where the jobs are coming from, and then try and move people into those jobs. So retraining, yes, but I don't think it's going to be a silver bullet. I don't think we can come up with a number of courses and say, okay, you go and retrain on that, because there was a lot of pushback from people who found they had lost their jobs in the financial crisis and were being forced into things that they were never going to do. It was an exercise really to get them off the live register, but they went straight back on it. And the thing that was most important is to not let people fall into long-term unemployment. I think that's the most important. So very specific, individualized, tailored programs, I think, would be something that we would be pushing for across the board. So
brilliant. Thank you for that. So Fiona, we'll come back to you at the end in terms of Q&A, and I think we'll have to save. You raised a really valid point in terms of the green economy, the just transition. I think that's a big topic for another day. Paul, maybe I'll turn to you next. So obviously, in your role, you're really sort of the cheerleader for businesses within the within the city council. What are you planning to do to support both new businesses and existing businesses to grow as we come out of the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks, Coach. I have my pom-poms here as a cheerleader. I'll take them out later. Excuse me. I suppose, look, I suppose what we've seen over the last year is very much a twin track process. So we have probably the same number of businesses looking to start or expand as pre-COVID. Okay, so a lot of those would be in the tech sector, and so they're either not affected or in a minority of cases actually advantaged because of the nature of what they do. So we continue to work with them in terms of grant aid and other soft supports. But then you have another cohort like in Richard and hospitality and retail in particular, who are actually still in crisis, obviously not open. So we've been trying to put some supports in place with those, and they're still there. So in the last year, I suppose we've had an awful lot of people pivot. I suppose the word pivot has been used a lot in the last year for businesses. Have to go online. So we, like, for example, we have a product called a trading online voucher. Traditionally, we'd have maybe 40 or 50 of those a year would be given out as to help people develop websites by and large or digital marketing strategies. So last year there was 550 approved, just because people had to go there. And depending on how people use those, some people are doing really well with that. Some people are not, or just have a website and it's not really getting any traction, and a lot of people in between. So that's, and I suppose what we're doing with those is we're following up with that in terms of other e-commerce support in training and guidance with that, and mentoring, because it has, in some cases, not all the cases, it has opened up new markets, because there genuinely is I suppose a hunger among people to shop local. I know that message has been used a lot over the last years, but particularly we really seen, and some of our local independent retailers would have seen it as well, that people really do want to shop local where they can. And I suppose people are again looking at the provenance of their food and so on. This thing has opened up some of that. So that's a very large part of our support. And we put in, we have a mentoring program. We have a large panel of 40 or 50 mentors that go in with people around, look, it could be around financial projections or marketing or whatever. So they'll continue. And I said, the level of new businesses is the same, which is great. I just spent the last 2 mornings, there's an accelerator program called New Frontiers, which DC be familiar with. So fabulous businesses. Just this is they're coming at the end of their 6-month program, and just some of those are going to go huge. They're global. So it's great to see that. But then you have this other cohort, as I say, who are still just waiting to open. And as Richard or DC would say, the worst thing, uncertainty is the worst thing for any business. So what we found with the people in that area, in the first sector, in the first lockdown, they got through knowing that they'd open, because there was new, they got through the second lockdown. They knew Christmas was coming, so that was great. This lockdown, they don't know what's happening, and that's what people are kind of exhausted around that one. I suppose I think the supports have been good, as Richard said earlier. I suppose just on the point of vouchers and all that, I actually don't think we should any more funding. If there's funding, should we continue or give more to the businesses, because I think there's a huge pent-up demand among the public. I think there's I think the last figures before Christmas was 123 billion on deposit or in savings, and well, there's a lot of people financially affected, a lot of people haven't been financially affected. So if more supports could be given towards the businesses and to make sure that they're able to open up properly. But look, that's a separate point, really, I think. No,
I think that's really valid. I'm just curious, you mentioned there about marketing, and specifically online marketing. Some people have been successful, some people not. So from what you're seeing, what's really been the key drivers for success for those people who've really managed to sort of take it to the next level with your support as it becomes to setting up an online business?
Yeah, I think the people who give it the time and energy and have a kind of strategy around, as a minority of people, they're obviously not tech, it might be from a technical background, they develop the website and think it will look after itself, but it won't, and then we have another cohort. I won't mention the particular business, but it's a retail shop with 4 staff, and and she really worked the website really well. And she actually ended up, her four staff were put on the pub payment initially while everything closed down. She now has 6 staff because the website is developed so well, but she really works a real strategy around, she knows who she's targeting, and she has to put some spend into that in terms of the social media spend, but it depends on the sector as well, to be fair. But we found the likes of the craft sector has done well. We had another a craft person who just quit her day job, finally quit her day job only recently, just because it's taken off so much. But look, there's others that are not so effective, but it really depends. That it's as one retailer told me recently, she treats it like another shop. That the website is another shop, and but look, it does take time and energy. But there is a lot of, as I said, there's no boundaries with the internet, you know, and so it varies. Look, and as I said, it depends on sector. And look, we have sectors like the hair salons and barbers; they can't sell anything online, so they're really crucified as well.
So, you know, just to follow up from that, then, Paul, you know, if you had somebody knocking on your door today to say, I want to start a new business, here's my idea, what would be the sort of 3 key pieces of advice you'd be giving them?
I suppose, look, it'd be the same before pre-COVID or whatever COVID. I suppose, do they understand the problem, what the customer problem they're solving? Look, that's always what we say to everybody. And do they understand the market, the scale of the market? Do they know their route to market, really, how they're going to get there? So they'd be the kind of the things that we would say to everybody, really. And that's what we've been through, even as I said, those last 2 days of interviews. It's trying to understand that, like, sometimes we have someone who with a technical background really understands the technicalities of it, but doesn't know how to get to market. And like, part of our job is maybe to put some of those supports together, or put them together into a team.
Okay, thank you for that. I know I had a question on my list that I'm not supposed to ask about. There's extra money coming from Europe as part of their COVID fund. Obviously, we don't know how much or when, but I'm assuming at some point in time there will be some additional funds coming from Europe. Yeah,
I suppose, look, I'd say that's at a macro level at the moment until it works its way down to a level. But I do think some of the things that have come out, I always try and look at the positives of things, but I think we have a more livable city as a result of this. We've got more pedestrianisation, more bike lanes, the outdoor dining. I know it's not going to change the world, but I think that'll go to another level again this summer, because I think there's hopefully some Foil to Ireland funding coming down the line to maybe bring it to another level. Richard mentioned Caroline Street and some of and look, there was some small grant aid towards windproofers and all that last year, but I think it'll go to another level this year. And so look, that's me, but I do think we've got some positives, things like the marina. The marina, the pedestrianisation of the marina have happened so easily pre-COVID, I think so. Anyway, and I suppose, look, just on the announcements, I suppose, again, I'm looking at the positives. The urban regeneration funding last Friday, the huge fund to unlock some more. We've got the pennies announcement today, and the iconic Custom House Quay building planning approval. So, I suppose, look, I'm trying to look at the positives, but
you're absolutely right to do so. That's the one thing about this pandemic, is where nobody enjoys being locked in their houses. Actually, what it's done is it's really forced people to think all those things that couldn't be done. People realize, actually, yes, you can do them. So it isn't a case of that they can't be done, but it's a case about the way we think about them and what we prioritize as important. So that means many things are possible. So thank you, Paul. I'll maybe hand over, because we're a little bit behind time, to Councillor Lorna Bogue. Thank you for joining us, Lorna. So obviously you've had the benefit or the curse of listening through everybody there. Really, in addition to the work that Paul and his team are doing, what else do you think you as councillors can be doing to support our businesses to reopen and adapt as we go forward post-pandemic?
Great. Well, thank you, Kojo. Also, you're looking great. I haven't seen you in a while.
I know.
I'm really excited to see everyone's faces. I've actually put on makeup like for video call, because I just generally not like my hair be scraped up. So thank you for inviting me. It's obviously been a blessing to listen to everyone's comments on it. With regards to what the council can be doing, sort of looking forward into the future, I have a few ideas around this that I have been kind of working on over the last while, but I think when it comes to how the state interacts in general with businesses and entrepreneurs, like they're almost like complete opposites. They're chalk and cheese, really, because I suppose I'm reading a lot of a really great economist, Mazzucato, at the moment, and the stuff that she has to say about the state and how it engages with firms and innovation is really, really interesting. And I think in an Irish context in particular, there's a real fear of risk. So they generally would tend not to take any risks, because if you take a risk, and if you're an entrepreneur, this, like if you take a risk, you risk failure. But if you're a civil servant, and you don't have any failures to your name, well, then you're a steady pair of hands. You rise up through the ranks, and then we sort of get this type of risk-free sort of environment in how council sort of interacts. With regards to the councillors in general, the rates would generally form about 40% of our income per year. It's actually been a fairly busy year in the rates office in general. I'm really glad to hear that they have been helpful to you in particular, Richard. And I would generally sort of say to people, like, please contact the rates office, or please contact the LEO office, if you have issues, because once you actually start that dialogue, usually they will actually engage. So that's just a general kind of like, please do go and talk about it. I mean, in terms of the schemes that are being administrated at the moment, the current new scheme that's coming in for 2021, or well, has been in for the last while, it's different to the scheme that went in last year. So I think there's a little bit of a lack of consistency there, because I mean, like, the conditions on it have changed, and also the amount that you can actually come back on the waiver has changed too. So like, I think there could be a little bit more kind of consistency in that regard, but that's coming from a central government sort of standpoint. I mean, looking maybe to the future, I think that, all of these new areas in the city and new builds and like these large schemes and large buildings, they certainly have their place within the development of the city as a whole, but I would kind of be more in the Jane Jacobs kind of school when it comes to like what makes a city thrive and grow, and that is actually having those creative spaces, having people actually mixing with each other and getting ideas for it. And that's how you actually create those network effects in which small and medium enterprises can sort of form in the first instance, but also where there's like mutually beneficial sort of spending patterns and innovation that comes about as a result of different people and groups and people from different backgrounds just mixing together. I think, with regards to the direction that the city development plan is moving in towards a compact city centre, I think that that's very positive. I think there's more help that we could get from central government, particularly with the living upstairs schemes, because like those are issued as kind of like a tax discount, or a tax waiver. And like, while I sort of appreciate why the civil service would engage in that type of funding, because, it's easy to do and administrate, I think in terms of like the actual uptake of the scheme, a grant system might actually just nudge people towards like actually investing in those upstairs spaces, because like we need to have people actually living above retail spaces within the city centre. And we actually did a presentation on this the other day. So it's not, you know, there's a lot of there's this idea that it's something to do with fire safety, that people can't do that. Like that's actually not the case. You know, so that's something that we kind of need to move towards. But also, you know, just in general, and this is kind of a larger kind of economics point, but, you know, I went and got the bit of paper, so I'll go and say it anyway. I think the way that the Irish economy in particular is kind of structured, like a lot of it is around you know, non-productive assets, which is property. You know, like we're a country that taxes labor, but we don't really tax capital so much. And we also don't really create an environment where people can actually take the risk of entering into entrepreneurship or entering into these inherently riskier types of work. And I would sort of hope that over time that we would sort of move to an economy that is actually more supportive of that. But like, you know, it goes back to, I suppose, issues that Fiona was saying as well, like in terms of like, you know, people having disposable income, for example, or having the capital in order to actually invest in a business. Like if you're paying, you know, the amounts of rent that people are currently paying at the moment, and that's eating up your entire disposable income, like, you know, there isn't really consumers being created there, and there aren't people who have the disposable income to, like, you know, put into the risk of like starting a business, or indeed to actually, you know, partake of you know, all of the businesses that exist within the city centre. Like, so I think that's a fundamental flaw that's in the economy. I know that we do have that really brilliant investment in Cork City, you know, through that funding. There's other sources of funding that are coming up as well. I mean, like the other day, I actually managed, just in the nick of time, to get a submission into the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. But there's about 850 million euros worth of grant you know, funding that was available there. But like year on year, we have been told by the European Union, like in terms of the recommendations for Ireland's economy and like having a resilient economy and having that recovery, like year on year, we're constantly being told the same thing, which is housing, affordable housing, childcare, all of these very, very simple basic things that, like in any other European country, a lot of people like have the luxury of taking for granted, and as something that's affordable, something that they can actually do. So, you know, I know I've sort of moved to a very macro level. To bring it back down to local government and the sort of the things that we could be doing. I've been working on an idea for the last well, since the first budget that I sort of participated in as a councillor, and it is to do with the you get a refund on the rates if you're under a certain amount, and then yeah, so it's the 3%. The name has escaped me now of that. It's the rates incentive scheme. Sorry. Yeah. So there is a scheme like that where businesses that pay up to €4,000 in rates per year will get a bonus back of 3% if they actually pay it on time. Now I've gone and looked at the figures for it, and like, you know, in terms of like, first of all, the makeup of businesses in Cork, the vast majority of them are small and medium enterprises. Like when you actually look in absolute terms, that's the vast majority of them. And then you're sort of looking at you know, a few larger sort of businesses. But like and it's something that I would hope in future that we would be sort of able to look at. But like, if we could actually just move those numbers around a little bit, I think that that's something that we could actually, you know, give people, give people, you know, that little extra bit of support, particularly if you're smaller business, and provide people with that breathing room. Another thing that I would like to happen, and this is kind of a much further kind of thing, so I don't necessarily know if it's something that I'll be able to make happen, but like I think in terms of like what local government in the UK is doing with regards to procurement is really, really interesting. It's something that we as a country, in terms of our local government, should actually be looking at. We should be looking at Cork City Council as an anchor institution that has an annual turnover of 220 million euros a year. So if we were to even like move like our procurement practices towards, you know, the Preston model of procurement, which is one that like actually manages to preference local businesses based on like, you know, social good that they provide to the community as a whole. Like that's the kind of thing where like, even if you move like 10% of like, you know, the operational budget of Cork City Council towards local businesses. And this is something that was done like under EU competition law and under EU procurement law, because the UK was obviously part of the UK at that time. So like there's ways and means of doing it. And I know that local government has actually recently moved towards a new procurement system in the last it's about 2 years ago now. Time is a flat circle, but you know, and that's sort of more towards you know, green procurement and things like that. But like I think that the Preston procurement model sits within a larger model of how local government can interact as anchor institutions within the local economy of the cities or you know, countryside around them, and it's about an economic model that's community wealth building, you know, and it's actually like, you know, shortening supply chains, which obviously is good for like, you know, reaching climate goals, but also, you know, like providing training opportunities for people, like providing opportunities for people to do something different to what they might otherwise be doing. But yeah, I might be going on a bit there. You know, you
that's fine. I will stop you. I will stop you because there's loads of questions. I want to bring everybody else in and let everybody go in the next 15 minutes so you can go and put your feet up in front of the telly. But thank you so much for that really interesting input, Lorna. You know, unfortunately, you know, we don't want to dwell too much on housing and affordable housing this evening. But again, that's a topic for another day. But what I would say is that's one of the few topics where everybody right across the community agrees that something must be done, particularly in Cork. You won't find, you know, because it really hampers growth of your economy if you basically don't have places that are affordable for people to live, and it just kills everything, and everybody agrees with this. You won't find anybody that would disagree with this, but you know, nobody has done anything about it. But that's a topic for another webinar. I'm going to go on and take some questions, and I'll invite all the panelists to feel free to jump into this. You would have seen the questions popping up. There's one here, particularly for you, Richard. Louise said, definitely looking forward to a breakfast bap and a coffee from Idaho. So you've got one person that can't wait for you to reopen. We'll all be standing outside the queue. So there's a couple of questions here. Maybe this is maybe one for to start with Paul, and maybe Lorna that's just coming here on food trucks. So would the food trucks and coffee ducks that have cropped up at present have any planning challenges, or are they seen as largely positive?
It's not something that we've necessarily discussed too much, really, in council meetings. So I don't really know what the council's attitude towards them in general is, to be honest. Maybe Paul might have a bit more.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in the area, but I do think there is some regulation needed, in fairness to some of the other coffee shops as well. If my understanding, if it's on a private property, then it's okay. But obviously, if it's on the public realm, they need a license. So, look, every week we get an email in the Leo office alone, someone looking to set up a food truck, and it's, you know, and there's a lot of, I think the council has put out tender at the moment for a coffee dock in Tramore Valley Park, I think, out at the moment. But yeah, it does look like anything. It does need some regulation, otherwise you end up with, you know, too many, and it's not fair on the I suppose the static, the Richards of the world who have a static premises with paying rates and so on.
I can definitely see Richard getting a double-decker bus in the Idaho colours somewhere and going on tour. You know, it's funny. It's one I've always loved the idea of Cork as a food truck city. You know, some of my favorite cities in the world, Austin, San Francisco, even London, like they do it well. But Paul is dead right. It has to be very controlled because I mean we're very lucky in Cork that in our food businesses in Cork, you know, we have a very strong culture of kind of reasonable regulation, you know what I mean? So, you know, you need to make sure that if you're allowing, I think my understanding is a lot of the existing bylaws that are there, you know, were for the 80s era of the chip vans parking on every corner and on pavements and just dumping rubbish everywhere and stuff. I can see Cork becoming a food truck city, but I think, as I said, as Paul's pointed out, like the laws is the law, you know, and it has to be done in a very measured way, you know.
Yeah, I mean, like I have received complaints certainly before, but it's usually to do with drainage. So, you know, that people are not disposing of fats and things correctly. You know, so I don't know. I suppose if people actually follow with the regulations, I don't know if we necessarily have a specific position on it.
Cool, thanks for that. So the next one here that I might take is a question here from an anonymous person. How can Cork SMEs better capture the student consumer in Cork now that the city boasts 2 universities and some 23,000 students in UCC and 15,000 in MUT?
I think they missed the big opportunity, which was when the first 2 months of when the COVID-19 payments came in last year, and all the students who were working one night a week in a bar were suddenly getting 350 quid a week into their hand. I think that was, I mean, look, it's a very, the student market is a very challenging one because for SMEs, because obviously, you know, a large number of a potential audience doesn't necessarily mean a large amount of available spend. And right now, you know, between the housing crisis that you mentioned and the kind of lack of investment in our educational system and just the very simple cost of going to college, you know, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't seem like a great audience for me for a business to be targeting. And that's not because it shouldn't be. It should be a very vibrant audience to target. But I mean, the financial pressures on students don't exactly make them, you know, a great consumer for most businesses at the moment.
Anybody else want to chip in on that one? Or I'll take silence as a no.
Yeah, well, I suppose it goes back to that kind of idea of community wealth building. So like, you know, like places like Birmingham, for example, like they've brought together like all of the anchor institutions within like the area. So the council, hospitals, and third level education institutions. And like by actually networking them together and getting them to think about ways that they can actually build community wealth. That's how they actually managed to like unlock, you know, the potential there. So like, you know, things like, you know, buy local sort of, you know, campaigns that are aimed at students, you know, this kind of thing, like, or like even like in terms of like how you're sort of, you know, engaging when you're doing your orientation in college, like, you know, if you have just landed in Cork and part of the orientation is actually that you're brought around to, you know, all the businesses and shown like what's here and what's there, like that's a really good way just to nudge people's behavior towards, you know, spending locally and, you know, congregating in town and, you know, enjoying the social life there, you know.
I think this is again probably more medium term, but UCC has plans to develop their business school there on the Brooks Houghton site. That's bringing 4,000 people right into the heart of the city. So look, it's probably going to be knocked back a couple of years because of COVID, but it will happen, you know. So just the spending power, but it is difficult. I suppose any business that depends on the student, the problem is 4 months of the year they're not there, and that's sometimes there's a few businesses on Washington Street would depend on that, and then, you know, that's kind of. But look, yeah, they are key demographic.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there, which we haven't really covered on a lot. That'd be the same challenges that Richard spoke to. You know, one of the biggest problems we've seen with COVID it's sort of ruined the regular seasonality of businesses. So particularly, people in retail and hospitality, you're basically going to, if you have a good run up to Christmas and you have a good Christmas, that can sort of tide you over. If you have a not so good Christmas, then you're struggling for the rest of the year. And obviously now with COVID, that sort of put that seasonality out the window, which is really going to be a bit of a struggle. And it's the same with any businesses relying on students. Now people haven't been here, and we'll see what happens as it comes back. Okay, so I'll go back to the first question that came in. Thank you for the panel, and thank you for the discussion. But do the panel know of any examples of other countries with social or economic policies that are doing a better job of supporting local businesses in cities like Cork? So I don't know, DC or Paul or anybody else, that are there countries that we should be copying from that do a really good job of supporting their local businesses?
Look, I'll just say one quick thing. I've been lucky enough, I suppose, to have a lot of engagement with Paul and the council and other people in City Hall. And the one thing I will say is that Cork City as a city hall and as a group of councillors and as a group of employees do an incredibly good job of interacting with cities all over Europe, through sister city programs and just through knowledge transfer, again, like Cork Business Association and Cork Chamber do similarly. So there's a lot of, we're very connected into the European ecosystem in terms of good stuff going on around the place. I mean, one of the more interesting ideas that I've seen is, and you see a lot of it in the UK, and we would have been involved in as a UK business in some of them, which is this idea of the business improvement districts, which is essentially where they give the opportunity to a group of businesses, in an area that maybe is in need of some work. Essentially, if the businesses come together and maybe make a plan and make a plan for that area, the council essentially in that particular city, rebate them some of the rates and stuff like that. And I mean, I've seen in particular, it's been very successful in places like Belfast and the north of England, where, I mean, all jokes aside, like give Richard, control of his neck of the woods there, for a few months, give him some of his rates money back. And I'm sure, the local businesses in a particular area really understand, what that area needs. I've always thought that was a fascinating idea in terms of, if you can get a bunch of businesses that are saying, well, look, we're willing to put our money where our mouth is and improve this area for everyone, but we'd kind of like to get something back out of it in terms of rates or something like that. It's just something I've come across that I thought was useful.
That's interesting. And that's also links in then to another question. Maybe Richard, you could come back on this, which is, let's assume you were given the purse strings here, and particularly now that we're seeing some of our larger stores like Debenhams go. What do you think we can do to bring more people into, particularly into Cork City Centre? Could it be markets, music, and such like? But how do you think, Richard, we should be sort of bringing people back into the city centre as things start to reopen?
I'm going to go for a slight cop-out on that and say that I think we're in for a massive state of flux just for the next year or so, because I think that people are still convinced by online buying. I think people have really got into the habit of clicking away on Friday night and seeing everything arrive in. I think people will want to go back to the shops, but I think an awful lot of people are still going to keep going with online. I think an awful lot of people are still going to be working from home, and then shops are shut. So I think it is going to be challenging, but things like Penny's committing to the city centre is excellent, and that might get other people going. But I think that the city is going to move to be that great American phrase, an experiential city. I think people are going to go into for culture, and they're going to go in to eat and to drink and to stroll and to meet friends, and then to look at shops where they'll probably buy online. But I think I'd like to see something like in Sydney. They did this amazing thing with their laneways where they kind of copied Melbourne and said, if you're a locally owned business and you're selling crafts, we are going to give you an incredibly reduced rate that you have to pay every year. So they're going into sort of areas, if you transfer to Cork, somewhere like Barrack Street or Shandon Street, where the rent is going to be cheaper anyway, and the council would waive rates completely, and trying to encourage businesses who would have no hope usually of setting up in Cork by giving them a low cost base. And I'd love to see something like that. So they got far more small, indigenous, locally owned shops. So when we actually get tourists back as well, they'll say, oh, that's so Cork. You wouldn't see that. And get away from this thing of where Patrick Street just looks like Basingstoke, and incentivize businesses and incentivize people, which will then incentivize customers.
No, absolutely. Does anybody else want to chime in on that question about how we can bring folks back into the city? I'll take silence as a no. Obviously, Richard, you've answered everything. So just one last one, because we do need to wrap up, and I know Lorna has to drop us as well. So just one last question for a couple of minutes, and maybe we'll start with Paul, and everybody else can come in. So Paul, you obviously talked about more people shopping online locally. Do you think Brexit has played a role in that? Now you have to pay customs duty on things coming from the UK, and is there anything that we can do to keep that keep people buying local, even when UK imports come back?
I'm not sure if Brexit has impacted that much yet. I suppose. Look, I know there's extra additional charges now if people are in some cases can't buy from the sites that they used to buy before. But it probably helped with one of the few upsides of Brexit. I suppose there'll probably be an element of that. But I thought, look, the council ran a shop local campaign in conjunction with the CBA at Christmas. You know, I think that message has got across. I think in terms of that shop local, and I do generate people want to. But I think Richard's point, I think, yeah, people are still looking for the experience. They still want to touch and feel. They will go into shops, and look, I think one of the things Cork is strong on is service. So they are getting a really good experience within the shop, and I support the city. Then the environment around the city, the things like the street art, the RDO initiative, all that is there as well. That buzz, that outdoor seating, and they may go into the shop and still buy from the shop online, but at least they're getting that experience within the shop, and they're getting that customer service within it. So it's that dual, I suppose, process really.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in really quickly. I'm sorry, I've got to sort of get into a call at 8:30.
Yes.
So I'm running behind myself today. I think I don't know if it's necessarily to do with Brexit. What I think is sort of driving buy local is the quality of the goods that are being produced locally. Like it's the quality and it's knowing that the person who has, you know, produced this for you is something, you know, like that people like really enjoy. There's a social interaction there, you know. So I think that's probably what's driving it, you know. And I think that a lot of like makers are very, very talented at you know, like developing a personal brand around what they're doing and you know, promoting themselves. You know, it is kind of interesting though, because like I suppose, like one particular example that where I would sort of think about buy local is to do with food and produce. Like that's something that I think is really interesting. But like I'm happy enough to like pay a premium to get something that has been produced locally, because, you know, the supply chains are shorter. So, you know, that's kind of generally how I would sort of say that that's a benefit of it as well. But also, you know, in terms of like the quality of the produce, and we're very, very lucky here. But I was chatting to a grower the other day, someone who has a small holding, and basically they don't get subsidized for producing food, yet the supermarkets do get subsidized for producing food. So like the lower quality food is like that's being mass produced is being subsidized, whereas like, you know, the locally produced food, and like this man was saying to me, because like I was sort of saying to him, you know, like that locally produced food like has this kind of gentrified type of air, like rightly or wrongly, but you know, that's the kind of impression that people have, and part of that is to do with the price point. And what he sort of said to me was like, well, you know, I actually would love to give the food as cheaply as I could because I want my customers to get good value, but like I'm not subsidized, whereas like, you know, the larger producers are subsidized. So like just using that as kind of like an example of the way that, you know, the state sort of tends to operate as well, that subsidies are being handed out perhaps not to the people who would actually get the most benefit or economic efficient use out of them. But anyway, I have to go, and thank you so much for inviting me this evening.
No, thank you so much for coming. And actually, that's a nice point to wrap it up. And let me thank all of our panel. You know, I would happily keep you here for another hour and a half, because you know we haven't got through all the questions, and I have many more. So we may take the opportunity to invite you back on another day, because your insights are really well, they really helped me, if nobody else, understand a little bit more about what's going on and where we are across the city. So just a massive thank you. We can't give you a round of applause, so we'll give you a virtual round of applause. And again, just thank you very much to Richard, BC, Fiona, Paul, and Lorna for spending their time. Hopefully, those of you who attended found it useful. My apologies if we didn't get to your questions this evening. Just one last thing: there is a survey here that we'd like you know, just to get some feedback. Scott's popped it up in the chat, and we'll email folks just to get us an understanding. One of the key things we're keen on as Social Democrats is evidence-based policy, and therefore, you know, if we're not asking people what their experiences are, we're not doing that well. So there's a short questionnaire that will be sending out to the folks that have dialed in this evening. So again, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank everybody, and thank the panel for attending, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.